That's right. Thank you very much, Sarah. Were you going to say a word around the school and the upcoming talks as well, if I move through?
Oh, yeah, okay, very good, thank you. Yeah, so just a bit of background for all of you who are joining us from all around the world, I think. So we are a business school based in Leeds in the UK. We're a Russell Group university, a very large institution, and very proud of the league tables that we're part of and the collaborations that we have with institutions across the UK and internationally. And as part of this, we do a lot of research. So as well as having students on campus when we're allowed, we also do a lot of work researching with businesses, and this is part of our exercise in delivering some of that knowledge back out to the community, which hopefully will help you to make some decisions and to start thinking about what this world might look like following the impacts of coronavirus. Obviously, we're here with Matt this afternoon, but we do have sessions running for the rest of this week at 4 o'clock, and we'd be very happy to see you back here again. There's a list here up on the screen, and we'll make sure that we will give you the links at the end of this particular session so that you can join us on future ones. When you've seen how amazing Matt is, it will just be a taster for you to get involved with the rest of the things that we're doing at the business school. Okay, I think, is that enough of an intro for you there, Matt?
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah. I didn't want to mess up the things that I have marketing on my back, otherwise we don't cover. So
okay.
Thank you.
All right.
So, thanks very much. So Sarah, we'll keep an eye on the chat window as we go through. If there's questions that come to you, just fire them away and we'll pick them up later on. So I'm Matt Davis, as Sarah said. I'm a psychologist. That's my training, my background. Really interested in physical space, how people interact, how we behave at work, how that fits into organizational systems. And I was asked to do a session on this topic, unsurprisingly, because of the change that lockdowns brought. And I said yes, and then realized how large a topic it is. So I was asked to keep this to 15 minutes. It's going to be closer to 20. I didn't tell marketing that before because they already told me off, but we're doing it. But there will be plenty of time for questions, discussion as we get towards the second part of it. So things I want to cover. So I'll keep this relatively high level. So I know we've got quite a mixed audience today. So I'll try and give you an introduction. First off, who works from home or has worked from home in the past? How's that differ to what we've got at the moment? And then the biggest chunk of the time I want to spend looking at, well, what do we know about how working from home might affect people? So psychologically, in terms of outcomes, performance, and so on as well. And then just a couple of minutes reflecting on, well, how much does this help us understand the current situation of people working under lockdown at home? And then a couple of minutes thinking about, well, what might this then mean for the office going forwards, looking after COVID and any long-term effects. I'm going to try and really pick up that last part in the question discussion. I've seen some of the questions coming in already, and I think we can really get into that in a bit more of an unstructured question and discussion phase. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of it then. So I think this interest really comes about from the articles I've been reading the last kind of couple of months. So I've been asked so many times now in terms of, well, what's going on? How are people feeling about working from home? What's the effect of this? And we've had kind of articles around mass experiment. Is this the end of the office? We don't need an office anymore. We've shifted overnight to home working. And look, we're still in business. Why do we need an office? Actually, what's the new normal going to be? We can't go back to what we did before. The genie's out of the bottle. We now know that we can work from places other than the office. So what really is going to happen? So let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. So first off then, how new is home working? So there's been a lot of discussion that this is a revolution that we're having at the moment. Well, how close to reality is it? So apologies if you're not in the UK. I think most of our audience is, so I'm using UK data around the population. So this comes from last ONS data from 2019, and they're looking at, well, how much of the workforce works from home. There's only about 5% that reported mainly working from home. So most people work somewhere else. Okay, so this is different. Second is about 12% of people, though, did say that the week before they were asked a question, they did work from home. So people are doing this a little bit, might not be their main place of work. And then just over a quarter, 26% or so, said that they had worked from home in the past, but it's not something they do regularly. So a lot of people have experience of this, even if it's not their regular way of working. And this doesn't seem to be a uniform arrangement. So not everybody gets to do this. So you are more likely to be working from home if you work in particular industries, like IT, communication, and also if you're in financial services and so on. Also, more likely if you had higher qualifications, so that or above, or if you're older, so if you're beyond the state pension age. And I can just see messages coming through that people are struggling with sound, or some people are struggling. I think the advice on that is just checking the speaker status and the sound on your system, because I think most people can hear. And there's a little bit of advice in the chat box if you want to have a look. So not everybody gets to work from home, okay? So it does seem to be a bit of a privileged position. Conversely, you are less likely to work from home, stands to reason, if you're in things like accommodation, food services, manufacturing, and also if you're a younger worker as well. So a bit of a demographic bias here as well. So it makes it really interesting. So when people talk about a revolution at the moment, well, yeah, it probably is. Because the data the government presented last Thursday in the COVID briefing was saying that 44% of people who worked last week worked from home. Now compare that to the 12% or so who were kind of reporting working from home that last survey from the ONS in 2019, a huge increase. So we would expect to see a lot of people who never had the opportunity to work from home now getting a taste of this. And in probably very different occupations and roles as well. Remember that data? Predominantly people high level, longer tenure, more established. This is a much greater chunk of the working population. So that's something to look at. I'll pick up on that later on. So how might this be affecting people then? What can people new to home working expect from the experience? Well, typically, and my brother often takes a jibe at me when I say I've been working from home, that it means I've done nothing, I haven't got dressed. This probably is the kind of image people have in their mind, unstructured and so on. How close to that reality is it? Are people just not working and not productive? Well, let's start off with a more general question. Are people more satisfied when they work away from the office at distance or work from home? Is this a positive for how you feel about your work? Well, the good news is that yes, by and large, the research we have, and this is looking across a whole series of studies, suggests actually this is great. You know, it's a real positive for how you feel, job satisfaction, how satisfied you are in the work itself, the experience of working, and your more general well-being. And it seems to me that's partly explained by the greater control that people feel over the work itself, how and when they do things, as well as managing their home environment. And it seems to be linked to better work-life balance as well. That's a real positive. So good for the employee. What does it mean for productivity? Are people less productive, more productive? Well, it seems to be actually they're more productive. So people aren't kind of sloping off and doing less. Actually, they're rated higher than office-based workers in terms of productivity. Well, if you're not seeing your colleagues so much, if you're not in the office, do you feel differently about your organization? Well, yes, but in a good way. And I think this is counterintuitive in some ways, that people actually feel more loyalty, more committed to their organization when they work remotely than compared to their office-based workers. Now, why is that? Well, it seems to be that this might be part of feeling trusted. So because you're in a privileged position, allowed to work from home, that people then repay that. They feel like they're valued as well. This is all really positive. What else can we see? Well, one of the things that comes through from a lot of the press coverage the last few months has been this worry that work is going to take over everything if you're working at home. Well, interestingly, when you look at home workers specifically, they tend to report lower levels of what we call work-family conflict, where you get your work and home in conflict. So you can't work because you're too busy with domestic kind of responsibilities, or you find that you can't shut off from work. And that people report greater balance actually between those. And I guess a positive in some ways is that women seem to benefit more from home working from the data. And it seems to be that they report that this is because they can structure work around other commitments. I think that's both really positive and also slightly depressing, because it suggests that women are still doing much more of the domestic and childcare responsibilities. So all this is really positive. So let's all just work from home forever, sack the office off, we don't need them anymore. Well, hold on a moment. So if we look a little bit deeper in terms of this balance and so on, well, it seems that, well, actually, yes, people say they have more balance, but actually home workers seem to typically extend their hours to work more in the early morning or late evening, or just work longer hours, full stop. And when you look at how they express this experience, they talk a lot about the difficulty managing boundaries, kind of feeling like they don't have separation between professional and domestic roles. So I can't switch off from email. If I'm working in the same place I'm living, I can never get away from it. I feel like I have to show that I'm working, because people can't see in the same way as if I was in an office. And Afshan Iqbal, so a PhD student with us, is doing really interesting work on this. Also, we see evidence that I said working from home seems to be good for your satisfaction with the job. Well, it seems to be it's not quite so straightforward, and there might be a bit of a tipping point. It seems to be if we go beyond 15 hours per week working from home, then we might start to see a bit of a plateau. So you don't continue to get more satisfied with your job, it stays about the same. And then over time, the more and more you work remotely, it gradually declines. So you maybe can have too much of a good thing. And again, seems to be a bit of a tipping point in terms of how this might affect interactions and relationships with colleagues as well. There's some evidence suggesting that more than maybe about half your time, 2.5 days a week, working remotely, seems to lead to worse relationships with colleagues, so quality and trust and so on. And also people who work from home a lot or kind of at distance report feeling more professionally isolated than their office-based colleagues. And in particular, that they're missing out on networking opportunities, informal learning and mentoring. So there might be a cost that's coming back from that kind of lack of interruption and distraction, but then there's a cost to the relationships as well in the less tangibles. Thinking about the relationships, why do we value those in companies? Well, people share information when they talk and get to know each other. Working from home, working remotely, that's negatively related to how much and how often people share information. We found in our own research, Helen Hughes, Mark Robinson and others, looking in large engineering firms, that distance and physical barriers make a real difference to who will interact with who will go to each other for advice, and then there's impacts on innovation and other performance. Similarly, a recent study showed that email and electronic communication doesn't wholly make up for this. So it can help kind of keep people interacting, but there's a cost in terms of not knowing who knows what. So who do I go to for information? Who needs to know this thing that I've been working on? And that's linked to lower performance. There can be a cost by not doing these kind of interactions. Often a worry as well from people who are working from home is it going to stop me from progressing in my career? A study that's just been published, looked at a group of employees over time, suggests this probably isn't the case. So there's no difference in number of promotions between people working in the office and working from home. So maybe we're not out of sight, out of mind. But people working from home showed lower salary growth. So I think there's a real need to think about how we maintain presence to make sure that doesn't kind of hold us back. But a big caveat, okay? So I'm sat in the attic surrounded by toys and things, and because I can't work downstairs where I normally would do because the kids and my wife are here. So working from home at the moment is not normal. The pressure of lockdown is not normal. Okay, so what does that mean for everything I just told you? Caveats. So most of the research that's been conducted has looked at knowledge workers. So typically that's people who are more kind of established, higher level, and more control over how they work and when they work. And often they've demonstrated they can be trusted. Remember that 44.4% figure I showed you? So this big increase in people working from home. Well, a lot of those people are not going to be those types of workers. More structured jobs where they have less control over when and how they do things. Okay, maybe less experience. They know less about how to get things done. Well, how's that going to affect them going forward? We have much less research looking at that. And a lot of that link between working from home and feeling more satisfied is actually really tied up in the fact that you are autonomous. You have a lot of control over how you do things. Okay, so we may not expect to see that same positive effect for people in lower level jobs. Lockdown itself is going to make working from home harder for some people. Lack of childcare, lack of opportunity to work from different places, cafes, coffee shops, all those kind of things. Having other people sharing your space. Conversely, for other people, it's going to be a dream. They've got nothing, the employer maybe, they've got nothing else to focus on. They can't see other people. They're living on their own. Maybe there's less opportunity to engage in hobbies and other distractions. It's not a true picture of what to expect. And then also, typically, the research we've had that's looked at home workers have looked at people who've chosen the role or been recruited into this. They've been trained and supported for it. At the moment, we've dumped people into this way of working. And we know that whenever you change working practices or introduce new technologies, it's a source of stress. Also, it tends to come at a learning and a productivity cost. Anecdotally, in these press reports, people are talking about productivity's up, we're working much better, or kept everything going, I never thought it was possible. Great, but we just need to be careful of lagging effects. So we may keep up with business as usual, the immediate day-to-day things we have to get done. Some things like innovation, for me, publishing articles and things, may take months, years to come to fruition. It's easy to put off those longer-term goals, and often those kind of effects take a while to come through. So I'd just be a little bit cautious on this. So finally, what does all of this mean for offices then? Well, again, people have said it's going to have to change radically. And in the short term, definitely. If you're going to open offices, keep them running, but have social distancing, and office designs that make that really clear with floor markings, really nice, spacious environments. But in reality, who's going to be prepared to carry the additional cost of an office that's only a 25 to 30% occupancy? Not going to happen. We will get back to a high density workspace. That's been the trend. It's not going to go away when we're allowed to do so. But what we're probably going to see is the shift in emphasis of what do we mean by an office. And if you can work from home for many things, then why do you want to go into the office? Well, it's for the social interaction, for the things that you can't do at home, that networking, that knowledge sharing, the chance encounters, those kind of things we're going in for. So we probably don't need the level of individual desks that you had before. We want the social environment. That's what we need. That's the thing that's most challenged by the social distancing. That's probably going to accelerate the trend we've seen anyway in the last 15 years towards more flexible workspace with those types of spaces in them. Good news is that they tend to be rated more highly by workers than traditional open plans. That's a good thing. But there's going to be challenges there as well about managing demand. And I'll come back to that in a bit. And the more we try and manage that demand, and the more we put structure and tell people when they can come into the office, then the more we probably encroach on that autonomy that people so enjoy with working from home. We're probably going to see a bit of a balancing act going on. So working from home may be better for individuals. So maybe your individual performance is higher because you're not being interrupted. But for an organization, we need people to be interacting. We need this knowledge sharing, discussions, support and mentorship. And that normally comes at a cost for the person being interrupted or sharing their knowledge. So we're probably going to end up with a bit of a half and half, I think, longer term. That seems to be where that tipping point is. Those benefits are probably going to be unlikely to be So younger people probably tend to, and less experienced, probably going to benefit more from being in the office than maybe more established employees who are the ones being interrupted and sharing their knowledge. So what? That's kind of where we get to. Working from home seems to be, from the evidence, broadly positive for individuals: satisfaction, work-life balance, commitment, career progression. Downsides in terms of isolation, reduced knowledge sharing and performance that comes from that. So most people are probably going to need a proportion of time co-located still. You see a shift, I think, in emphasis around what offices need to do, social, cultural purpose, more than just being a place to house your workers, check up on them. So that's going to pose challenges to us. Performance management, when you can't see your workers in the same way. Diversity and equality coming through from that as well. And the final thing just to say is lockdown isn't normal. Okay, so the experience people have had so far, whether positive or negative, is not necessarily the same when we go back to a semblance of normality. And there may be lagging effects and consequences, okay, particularly around the knowledge and the interaction that may take time to show up. And I can see kind of questions coming through on the chat already. So I think this is where I will ask for Sarah's help to help try and work out what to come to first. And I appreciate I've got, in a short time, and fired information. So this is time to really pick up on things and go into depth.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. It's really, really helpful and lots of things in there to think about. So just picking up on some of the questions from people who are here listening to you at the moment. There was one early on from Louise who says that she's currently setting up new digital hubs around the country, and she's thinking about setting one up to be completely virtual all of the time. I suppose thinking and reflecting on some of the things that you've just talked about in terms of the missing social elements of that, what would you give her in terms of recommendations on how to address those?
Yeah, so I think kind of having just a purely virtual team, obviously that existed before lockdown. People have been doing that. Again, really interesting research on that. There's a recent study that was looking at how you manage that, and particularly innovation and performance, where people don't have the opportunity to come together in person so much. And what they really showed was, I think, how instrumental good management was in that situation. So around kind of really spending the time as a manager one-on-one with kind of members of the team, taking the time to listen to them, get feedback, include them in decision making, and not just using kind of big Zoom sessions or meeting sessions or email, but that kind of personal interaction with the leader, with the manager, was really key to good decision making, innovation coming through, and people feeling part of those teams. And I think in some ways this is slightly easier to manage when you have people who are exclusively working remotely or home working, or just in the office, because everybody has the same experience and same expectation. So you'll see, I think, from the experience people have been sharing the last few months around kind of organising virtual get-togethers and socials and so on, that's important. We know that one of the big things around face-to-face interaction is being able to establish trust and intimacy with colleagues. So it's just looking to engineer ways that people can come together and actually start to get to know each other outside of the professional context. So where they're not feeling like they have to be on their guard and being judged about what they're saying, and allowing that frequency of interaction. Because we know from decades and decades of psychological research that friendships and the depth of those friendships really kind of comes from how often you get to interact with others. So finding ways to support that. And I think when the lockdown is eased further, then if there are opportunities to have kind of in-person events and days together, I think that's really important, just kind of occasionally, to keep up that kind of that trust and the opportunity to have those non-work discussions.
Okay, that's really helpful. There's a couple of different themes kind of coming out in several of the different questions. So I'll sort of pitch them both to you, and you can see how you want to address them. One's around sort of piggybacking on that. How does that work with new starters? So in terms of those social interactions, and I suppose all of us find right now it's easier to talk people that we already knew, but how are we going to induct new staff? And then I suppose also a key theme that's coming through from some of the questions from, I guess, from leaders of businesses and sort of team leaders, thinking about how do we keep up the productivity and the motivation of staff. I guess picking up on your point earlier about that plateau. So a couple of questions there for you.
Yeah, so if we maybe start with the induction, I guess. So there's no way of saying it other than that it's difficult. And the fact that all the processes and practices we normally have in place to help welcome people to a team, help them understand what it means to work here, wherever here is, and what it means to be part of this organization, is going to be completely different. And one of the purposes of an office is that it gives you a real a symbolic way of showing what it means to be in this company, the way that the culture works, the way we organize things. So I think there's a need to be real sensitive to explaining maybe a bit more explicitly some of those things that people pick up intuitively when they come in and start observing others around them within an office and having those kind of little social discussions with people. There's probably actually a need for a bit more kind of formal discussion and kind of training around this is how we do things, this is what is expected, in a way that you wouldn't have to when people are in the office environment. And also I think, as I mentioned, there's research around people feeling they miss out on mentorship and those kind of networking opportunities. And I think, again, we have to really engineer those for new starters. So we have to be much more directive about linking them up with others who might have relevant experience, maybe people who are relatively new to the organization and help them learn the ropes. But we have to really push that because people aren't going to be just casually introduced in the same kind of way. And it kind of picks up a little bit on the productivity side as well. So I mentioned that study that said that working from home and virtual working makes it harder to know who knows what, who has the information that I really need, who has that knowledge that's valuable. So again, it's looking to make sure that we talk more openly about that. So what are we working on? What have we found out that's really important lately? What are we stuck on? Those kind of pieces of information that we share. But again, you might kind of often pick up in passing or by glancing over at somebody else's computer screen or taking a walk around the office, you pick up on that kind of information. We need to work hard to make that explicit and then also to share that with the people who need to know it. And I think there's a real job for team leaders, for leaders here, to make sure they're being that bridge builder in a way that they might not have to be so active in management when they're in the office. The bad news probably is that if you're a team leader, a manager, a leader, you're going to have to work harder when your staff aren't here because you need to make these things happen, like in a way that you can't just nudge when you're in the office environment. So it may well be that there's a cost to your own performance by trying to keep everybody else on track. And also just checking in on them as well, because when people are virtual, it's easier to be anonymous, it's easier to sit back. And again, there's a real role for managers to make sure people are engaging, that you're checking in with them, that you're drawing them into the discussions. Now, in some ways, that's easier to do on meetings, because if you've got more than 5 or 6 people, you have to be very directive in running a meeting and pulling people in. But we can use that as an opportunity to maybe pull people in who in a face-to-face meeting wouldn't feel comfortable raising their hand or challenging something. I think we as chairs of meetings or leaders can actually really help people with that. So we ask them to contribute because that's going to be much more normalized at the moment.
Thanks, yeah. Matt. No, it's really good, and we had a comment here from Sarah as well, saying that she's used this time to attach a mentor to her one of her new starters, and that sounds like you're talking about how you can. That's a really good way of being able to pass on those kind of implicit cultural things, isn't it?
Yeah.
So some good ideas.
We often don't recognise how much people pick up by observation and tacitly. So I think as much as it probably feels very un-British to those of us who are from the UK, I think we need to just be much more explicit about what we expect, how you do things, how things work, and saying it's okay to ask me about this. Again, people often feel really hesitant about asking for help, seeking information. because it can be seen as a sign of weakness, or that you're not competent, or that you haven't been listening to what you've been told. So it's making sure people feel comfortable with that as well.
Great. So maybe we could just talk a bit about the sort of the maintenance of motivation and productivity. How do leaders manage to support their staff in getting over that kind of 15-hour plateau?
Yeah. Well, I'll come back to the point that lockdown's not normal. So for some people, motivation and staying focused is not going to be a problem. So I know, talking to colleagues, talking to friends and others who are in positions where they haven't got anything, they're finding this a real comfort to throw themselves into work. There'll be some people who are just running with that, and maybe it's more of an issue of making sure they look after themselves and find other ways of switching off. For those, I think, who are maybe struggling with motivation a bit more, I think we need to really drill into, well, why is that? Because there will be people who are struggling mainly because it's the balance. So they're struggling to balance the work demands and attention with the family and other roles they might be having at home at the moment. So how do we support them in that sense? And that might be more around, changing the types of tasks they're working on, making it okay to work different hours, and not penalising for that in terms of meetings and so on. For others, then it's thinking about, well, what are they maybe missing? And it's probably that social interaction. And I know there's a lot of people who are keeping it in touch, Teams, Zoom, Slack, and other kind of media, but that can be overloading for some people. It's making sure maybe this isn't being thrust upon everybody. But also in terms of looking at how we make this, I guess, less just task oriented as well, which I think is a danger. We just focus on keeping up with where we are, so performance. Is everybody kind of getting everything they need to keep working, and just building in time for more of the kind of water cooler kind of chats that you get in the office, and how's the family, how are these kind of things going? And that's unlikely to be big group chats. It's more the one-on-one. So how do we get people made to buddy up with each other, keep that going? Also tend to find, well, can we get challenges as well? So there's nothing as motivating as having a challenge in a kind of positive way. So can we think of just fun things to focus on through the week as well? And that might be in terms of coming up with the funniest meme they found about the situation we're in. It might be around kind of photo stuff. It might be kind of funny observations, pictures from when they've been out and about. It might be kind of more performance related, but something that gives you something enjoyable to focus on, that might be a bit challenging but non-work related. Wow. Yeah, I'll stop talking on that.
Well, I mean, that's really good, and I've invited people to share the things that they've been doing as well, so that we can sort of see a collection of things that have been working, which I think is really helpful. Yeah, I like the idea of banning meetings at a certain time. That sounds really good. There's been a couple of, so people, I guess, are starting to also think about, like, what's next. So a couple of things that you said have been, this isn't the normal, but we've had a few questions come in along the lines of, okay, fine, but what is the new normal going to look like? So in terms of, are we going to be now building in working from home a lot more, and how might that change? So the office space as well, some of the physical things that we might have to look at.
Yeah. So I think there's what's going to be different the next 12 or 18 months, depending on how long social distancing is required and what happens with COVID. And I'd just be a little bit hesitant about reading anything too much into that being a permanent change, because I think we'll do what we need to get through that period. But it may not be the best solution. It's the best we can make of the situation. I think kind of looking more medium term then, I don't think people who have had the experience of home working and the flexibility that can provide, granted, doing it all the time is probably not going to be most people's preference, but I don't think they're going to be willing to give up all of that kind of flexibility and autonomy that comes with it. I think also we'll see, and we're starting to see that, I think, in terms of from some of the office designers and engineering firms that work in this space and facility management as well. Just thinking about how we move more rapidly, as I was saying, towards more flexible offices, agile working as well. And we've seen a lot of larger companies moving over the last few years towards this. But I think we'll see this kind of moving further. So I think the era of having kind of allocated desks and your own offices is gone. So I think the only way that we can really make this work in terms of balancing being able to work from home and having an office space to come back in for interaction is by making that more efficient. And that means that you have to take out some of that individual space. So I think that's probably where we'll go. I remember a few weeks ago having a bit of a joke with a couple of colleagues about what campus might be like when we come back from lockdown. And the likelihood that the university will have decided to convert our office building into either student accommodation or a boutique hotel with another franchise coffee shop in the floor, on the ground floor, which probably isn't too far away where that goes. It's not a suggestion, Vice Chancellor, if you're watching. But then being expected probably to pay £3.50, £4 a cup of coffee to sit there and meet students and get on with your work. And I think there's probably going to be a bit of a trade-off, a tension here, because and having seen this in companies where they've gone for agile working and people working more remotely, not having their own space, we've had pushback in the past from people who resent not being able to buy their season ticket to travel into work because they're only going in a couple of days. So they perceived it as a bit of a cost to them. We've also seen people who kick back because that loss of their individual space and where they could keep their stuff permanently and the privacy it gave them, they didn't feel they were getting enough back from the flexibility. So I think you can get quite an individual kind of experience here. People will have different preferences. So I think that flexibility needs to be key here. And I think we're going to be in trouble if we push everybody too hard towards home working, because there's going to be an awful lot of people who don't have the luxury of a house that's big enough or a flat that's big enough to work comfortably in, who maybe don't have a great home situation, and actually getting out to the office is a real kind of relief, and it gives them a safe and a supportive environment to work in. And also there's going to be people who it's not going to be good for their well-being, in terms of sense of isolation and interaction and so on. So we need to be sensitive, I think, to these individual circumstances. And we're probably going to see issues with equity here as well. Because how do we manage this situation where we might have some people working much more from home than others, some people being told they can't work from the office as much or have the space that they think they need, and that might be bound up with age. So you might have younger workers who don't have the space they need at home, or who want to be in the office for social reasons. And also, I think in terms of, not everybody's going to have a role that can be suited to working from home, or where it's very pleasant. So if I'm doing a really repetitive job, actually being able to chat to people around me, having distractions going on, being able to get up every so often, have a cup of coffee with those around me, that can make a real difference in motivation. If there isn't really a value, you're not really feeling you love your job, that it's interesting in itself, then actually the social environment is really important to keeping the motivation, the commitment as well. And that's why I was saying there's a bit of a caveat with the past research that's predominantly looked at knowledge workers who are predominantly better educated, more independent, more control, and who tend to enjoy their job more anyway. So what happens if you start to cut out that social side for people who aren't in that position?
Well, thanks, Matt. There's a lot to think about there in terms of, and I guess a lot of questions. So some of the really practical things that are cropping up as part of the questions that have been coming through is, where there are those changes, how is that going to be reflected in some of the process side of things? So somebody's mentioned, we had a question related to people being able to print things at home and keep documents, so GDPR is an issue. There were questions about how do we look at doing staff review processes if we're having people working at home. So how is this going to become how is this going to change some of the processes behind how we work, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I bought myself a new shredder last week because I realised I've got all sorts of things that I shouldn't probably have at home longer term because it's identifiable data and so on. And I think it's a real issue. I think this is one of the things that firms have been a little bit slow waking up to as well. Over and above some of the IT security issues, with so many people using devices at home, accessing secure information, confidential information, maybe over unsecure connections. And I think at the moment people are just making do or finding workarounds, but that's not a long-term solution. So as I said earlier on, I think there will be some roles and some tasks where you will need to be in a managed space where there's that security over the information about how people are working. And also for some of those really confidential discussions, whether it's client discussions or HR discussions, that you don't want people just randomly walking into. So I was doing a PhD dive a week or so ago, and the cat walked in, and followed by my 3-year-old. And those kind of things that, people will grin and bear it at the moment because we're in an unusual situation. But longer term, they're not, and we need to be taking account of that. So it might be that you have your own managed office that people will go into, and you book those kind of interactions and those tasks for particular days. It might be we use satellite offices a bit more. So we might have a greater number of small leased offices closer to people to go into for that. We might use co-working spaces, but those issues of confidentiality will probably come back in again. But I think just suggesting that people who have a bad internet connection go and use a cafe probably isn't a solution. And I think as part of that as well, there's the kind of cultural side of, if you don't ever come together and you don't really have a base, then you need to think really creatively about how do you make people feel that they work for you. So as I said, offices really kind of reinforce that. So what do we do without it? And I don't think just branding your team's kind of pages, what have you, really. So we need to think about other things that make me feel like I work in a place and there's a culture. We know how important that is. We might also see a bit of a change in terms of demand in the residential market as well. So I know there's been some data coming through from estate agents, which I'd always take with a pinch of salt in their early centres. But in terms of web searches and Google Rightmove searches for towns, for houses in towns further out of main cities, for larger properties and so on. And I think also probably the necessity of a good internet connection will go up. And we might also see the idea of co-working spaces within apartment buildings and maybe blocks of flats and other gated communities becoming more important as well. So having spaces where people feel that they can leave home and go to work, but close to home as well, and maybe paying as part of their rent or their service charge for that as well. And sorry, I ended up rambling towards the end there. So I think
it raises some really interesting points though, because I know one of the questions that came in sort of speaks to this about how working at home more might actually enhance some of the inequalities that we have in terms of access to some of those things. So in terms of leaders then, I guess this is a change in thinking around what staff need to have access to. And there's some chat in the window here around what does that mean in terms of sort of reimbursing staff. So I guess this is, if they don't have those things, what should places of work offer to their employees, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. So equity and diversity, I think, are important here. So I guess this might go one of two ways in terms of, in this way that some people get a an allowance for transport, that we might see a norm for allowance for home working. A lot of companies do this already, where it's part of the contract to work from home. I don't think it's happening massively at the moment with the short-term shift to home working during lockdown. And it's been said in the chat box that you can have a bit of a tax allowance for working from home. But that doesn't really cut it if you're actually thinking about having to dedicate a whole room in your house to a home office, and what that then means for mortgage costs and so on to get a place that's large enough for it, or what the impact is on your family or your living situation if you're giving over this chunk of floor space to work for your employer. It's coming at a cost of the others in your house. So yeah, so inequality. So older workers tend to have larger properties. We know this, and also the space if they still have dependent children at home, to really not feel the pinch quite as much. As I said before, younger workers tend not historically to have worked from home so much, which has probably meant that we haven't seen this quite so much within companies being raised as an equality issue. Also, there's an issue around, I guess, maybe reinforcing cliques and stereotypes we might have at work. So I mentioned the study recently that showed that promotion didn't seem to be harmed by working remotely. But I think it's something we've got to be really mindful of. If we're infrequently meeting and we're having to be much more active in terms of seeking out who we talk to, when we talk to them, managing those social interactions, then often people will fall back on the people they already know, the people they feel more comfortable with. So that could be negative for BAME or for other minorities as well, or people who just personality-wise don't feel as confident or asserting themselves kind of electronically, and pushing that.
So Matt, just to pick up on that particular point, we've actually had a lot of questions around this idea of not everybody is as confident digitally as others. There's been some sort of comparisons made about introverts versus extroverts, and somebody else was earlier mentioning about how you manage that in a meeting when you're running it online. Just as you happen to mention it, do you have any particular thoughts and I suppose tips for people who are listening as when you are talking about things online, how should that be managed in such a way that it encompasses these different kinds of personalities?
Yep. Well, I think the good news in some ways is because of the nature of online meetings, as I said before, they tend to need to be more actively managed. So this is I think positive and negative for all personality profiles or types. So I think yes. So if you're more outgoing or extroverted or sociable, then you may feel or digitally literate, you may feel more confident asserting yourself in online meetings or kind of through those medium. But actually, if you're being actively managed, which should be happening, so you're calling people in, you're making sure people get equal coverage within a meeting. So we might mute everybody and ask them to raise a hand kind of digitally or wave, or you just more systematically work through people to ensure everybody can make a contribution. Then it stops people dominating in the way that they can in person and just chipping in or closing people down. Also means that people who feel less confident contributing, if you're directly pulling them into the conversation and you're unmuting them, you're making them kind of part of the conversation, that can help. The other thing there, I think, as well is just we know that there are people, particularly those who are less emotionally secure from the research, who might feel slightly more awkward in social situations or just less comfortable when they're full screen, maybe in a video chat. It's just think, how do we manage this? So it might be inviting people, if there's a key question or decision that we're talking through, maybe to kind of comment through a chat box and having those kind of direct for the moderator. So you don't have to do that publicly. You don't have to be on screen to do it. You can still contribute. So I think there's a real role here for managers and meeting chairs and so on to think about how do I draw people in, not make them feel self-conscious, but actually use this as a real good opportunity to stop the usual suspects who tend to dominate discussion from doing that. We can actively silence people in a way that even the best one in the world is a struggle to do in person.
It's very, very tempting to wish that when you've got kids around, though, isn't it? I don't know about you, but I'm finding it much easier having people's names on the screen, because then I can remember who everybody is. So I'm going to ask you a bit about the environment, and then I'm going to leave you some time to give people some top tips to take away before we finish today. So we had some questions come in before on the registration sheets, and we've not really touched on it too much at the moment. So I thought we should before we finish. And it's kind of is there a trade-off, do you think, between working from home and the environment? There's a lot of news stories around about how dolphins are back and things like that. Is this something that we actually should be embracing for our environment, do you think?
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because this is going to be the classic academic answer. We need to think about more deeply and do some more research, because the evidence at the moment is really conflicting. So yes, in terms of reduced transport emissions, so people aren't commuting unnecessarily, so there's a massive positive there. And then some of the wider knock-on effects in terms of health benefits that come from that as well, and connection with nature. It's a bit more mixed if we're looking at what that means for, I guess, the efficiency of buildings and so on, and energy usage when people are working. Most people, less of an issue during the summer, but most people are going to struggle to just heat a single room when they're working from home in the winter. And the UK tends to get quite cold for many months of the year. And that tends to be less efficient and more energy consuming than having people co-located in a high density office with a nice efficient ventilation system and maybe their own power generation and so on through renewables on site. So I think there's pros and cons. So I think, again, we need to think a little bit about how we help people or educate people about not losing some of the benefits of not commuting, the environmental benefits of working from home, by how they're using their home itself and the technologies they're using. So making sure they're not less efficient than the more managed, maybe computer systems we might be using in the office, the proliferation maybe of printers and shredders and all these other devices that used to have one big efficient, highly utilized printer or what have you in office, and now you have 30 or 40 spread around people's houses. So I think we need to think that through a bit more carefully, and I think this is the more medium-term shift. But again, we're going to get a bit of a rub, I think, in terms of how much am I as an employee going to accept my company telling me how I should act at home, how I should run my home, where I get my energy supply from. There's a line there being crossed.
It's like unpicking something, isn't it? As soon as you start picking away at it, everything kind of unravels, and you have to start thinking about so many different sides to these issues.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess we've been lucky with the weather so far that we've not had to spend so much time and energy heating our own homes.
Yeah.
So in the last few minutes before we finish, I think it would be great if you had a few top tips for people. One of the things that has come up a couple of times is, how do you deal with the lack of separation between work hours and home hours? How do you stop being expected to be reachable all the time? So I wondered if you had any thoughts around that.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say is everybody's going to find techniques that work better for them than others, and it's really individual, I think, in terms of how this gets managed. So again, looking at people who've been working from home and in virtual teams for a long time, they typically say that boundary thing's a real issue. The kind of things that they do which are successful, and some will work for you, others may not. So one is just physically leaving the house to go to work. So literally get out the front door, go for a walk, even if it's just around the block or the park, and then come back, and mentally you've arrived at work before you sit down. They can give you that separation.
It wasn't working off the computer, so I had no choice but to run it through the phone.
And then,
Lucy, if you're listening to us, you're not on mute, so we can hear you, I'm afraid. Would you mind putting your microphone on mute?
So
Sorry,
physically,
Matt, carry on.
So physically getting separated separation, so maybe kind of leaving, so you have that mental separation from work as well. If you have the luxury, so having people find that just having a dedicated space for work, somewhere where they can shut the door on it at the end of the day. I know for a lot of people that's a luxury that they may not have. So then how else can we do that? Well, think about, well, do I have somewhere that I can pack everything up? So working in a way that I can physically cover it up, it's out of sight when I decide it's the end of the day. You know, sometimes even just kind of throwing the laptop in a bag under the sofa, I found kind of puts it away at the end of the day. Equally, so some people find that having a real rigid structure is really important for them. So you have set hours that you work, and that you're realistic, so you don't want to lose the flexibility. So I'm going to have a half hour mid-morning where I do this chore, or I go for a walk, or I go and have coffee with my friend. But having a structure that you know that you're covering your hours, you don't deviate from it. I think people find they get peace of mind from that as well, and then feel comfortable to say, actually, you know what, I've done a full day, I'm now going to turn the computer off, I'm going to switch the email off on my phone as well, I'm done. Okay, and not allowing it to bleed into the other hours.
I really like that. Lots of very practical top tips there. So just in the last couple of minutes before we finish, have you got
there's only one other thing I say on that. Is just
sorry,
at the moment, no, but at the moment, so just one other thing is just saying that I think it's really important we just don't lose sight of the fact that this is not a normal situation. So it's okay not to to feel that you're not performing 100%, or that things aren't quite as good as they should be, or that, you know what, I'm not managing to juggle everything as much as I'd hoped to do, because it's reality for many people, and this isn't kind of what kind of normal life is like. So cut yourself a little bit of slack, try and kind of find the things that work for you, and if you have a bad day where it feels like you didn't manage to get much done, or you weren't firing on all cylinders, try a different strategy the next day. If that doesn't work, try again, and just that trial and error, and just be honest with yourself that things are hard at the moment.
Great, many thanks. We've got one more minute. Do you have any other practical top tips for people before we sign off and say thank you very much?
I think the only other thing would be in terms of don't go overboard on the group meetings and Zooms and everything else. For some people, it's going to be really appreciated. For others, they're finding the extra kind of interaction and this expectation to be sociable actually really uncomfortable. And it's too much. It's more than they would normally be doing. So just think about how do we make it something people can very happily opt into, but don't feel awkward about declining or not responding to. So just making sure we cater for those different preferences.
Oh, yeah, that's a good tip. Yeah, keeping people giving people the option. That sounds great. We've come to time. I'm sure we didn't actually quite get through all of the questions, but hopefully we covered some of the major themes for you. On behalf of everyone, thank you ever so much, Matt. That was really, really helpful, and lots of very sort of reflective, thought-provoking comments and questions coming through. Thank you to everyone who signed in. It's been great to have you all here, and you've all been really interactive and chatty, which is lovely. We will make these slides and hopefully a recording of it available, and we'll let you know when that's available. But thank you, everyone. It's been great, and we've got more webinars planned for the rest of the week if you want to join us. Thank you.
Just on that, the last word that I have is just, if people are interested in this and how it's affecting their own companies, get in touch. We're running research studies at the moment on this, so let us know if you want to take part in it as well. Contact details are up there.
Oh, excellent. Yes, great. Well, that sounds like it's really timely as well. There were definitely people here talking about, there was one lady talking about moving a charity to a smaller location because they're going to do more hot desking. So it sounds like this is all really live at the moment.
Definitely. Well, maybe we'll put that note on the message that goes out maybe afterwards with the slides and so on.
Okay. Thank you ever so much, Matt.
Thanks very much, everybody. Looking forward to seeing all the comments and scrolling back up. Thanks very much.
Cheers.